Welcome to Ethos Effect.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast. After building and learning from failures,
We discovered our ethos and leveraged it
to scale, sell, and build again our seven-figure businesses.
whether you're starting out or leveling up.
This podcast is your source for innovation and lasting impact. Okay, so I know I say this a lot, but this next one, this show is really good. Like I will re-listen to our own podcast multiple times with Katie Richardson. You will hear her background, but wow. Talk about, I hate to use the term rags to riches, but I feel like it kind of applies.
Yeah, very vulnerable story about kind of starting her business. And I mean, she kind of describes how broke she was at that point in time, starting off in the recession in 2007, 2008. And not only starting a business, but starting a product-based business, which means you have to go all out. It's not service-based where you can just kind of invest your time, start to grow naturally. She went all the way out to market, started a product line, scaled that.
Scaled that significantly, yes. 26 countries, 2,000 retail stores. Like that's not small potatoes, friends. That's big league. So we're going to hear about turning opposition into strength, how the obstacle is the way, and how you as an entrepreneur do not have to be a victim to your business. So truly embracing a powerful life and designing your life exactly the way that you want to, not the way that everybody else does, right? Because business, we get into this to have freedom, but my definition of freedom is different than yours.
Yes, and we've certainly done some of that searching internally as our business has grown. What does that look like for us? It's so easy to get kind of caught up into it, trying to just achieve some outside metric of success and not realizing like you're pretty unhappy while you're chasing it.
Exactly.
So she went through that process, changed it, and made her business work for her, all while being, keeping the important things in her mind, which was her family and raising her kids and having, the time she needed.
Yeah, it was just such a great example. The whole conversation of being intentional. So being intentional, I'd like to ask you, share, like, subscribe to our podcast. Give us feedback. We are literally here for you to help you build your business, to get inspired together, to create change, to revolutionize industries. And we can't just do that on our own. We want to know what you want to hear. So please share, like, subscribe, give us feedback. Without further ado, the real reason you're here, let's go hear from the expert, Katie Richardson. Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of The Ethos Effect. Today, we are talking with Katie Richardson, an incredible entrepreneur who has scaled and sold an amazing business that we're going to hear all about today, and now is on a mission to develop powerful leaders. Katie, we are so happy that you are here today. Thank you for being here.
Chelsea and Donovan, I'm super pumped to be here. Really excited to share some wisdom with people who are building something incredible.
Oh, well, thank you. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. So for our listeners, that podcast is called What's Working Now. We're going to talk a bit about it today. But with your guests on your show, you talk a lot about storytelling and the power of storytelling. So let's catch our listeners up to your story, who you are, what you've done.
I grew up the fourth of six kids. When I was 3, my mom had twins. And from a really young age, in order to kind of survive, I learned to be invisible. And I was really curious about life and the world. And so that led me to be a very creative individual. And, eventually I ended up at university, and I was really good at getting the grades that I needed to. But something about being at university helped me realize that I was kind of moving in the direction of a place that really didn't speak to me. And, getting good test scores and being intellectual was really important in my home. And so I was able to do it as a way to kind of get approval and love and attention, right? And when I was in college, I started to realize that there were big parts of me that I was ignoring. And that led me to a program, luckily within the university that I was at, called industrial design. And it's not what it sounds like. You're not designing factories. In a sense, it's more like this artistic engineer, and you are problem solving, utilizing things like form and function and engineering But it's really taking into consideration the human who's interacting with this object. You're designing objects, but it's really understanding the person and their needs. And so there was this big part of me that really hadn't been engaged in, at least in education, that just came to life once I found industrial design, and I really thrived. I got scholarships that I didn't even ask for. I won national design awards. And until then, I'd kind of been getting by, excelling, but getting by. And all of a sudden, this part of me just was like so excited because I was problem solving on a really deep and profound human level. And I loved it, Chelsea. And so I started thriving in school more effortlessly than I ever had before. And from there, I found my husband and started having kids. And that part of me that was lit up in university was suddenly drowning in laundry and dishes and kind of the monotony of life. And so, long story short, I was doing things while my kids were asleep. I had my mom's 1962 Bernina, it's a sewing machine. And while my kids were asleep, I started making products out of fabric. And I was at a children's boutique and I was using these products. And it included things like a baby carrier that I had designed and made. My boys were wearing shoes that I had made and hats and blankets. Like I was doing those things out of necessity. We were living on very little income. And I had made these products and this woman starts attacking me basically. And I was like, where'd you get all this stuff? And she kind of had this aggressive energy towards me. And I started to get really defensive. And honestly, I was embarrassed because the reason I was making them is because I couldn't afford the things in her store. I was really embarrassed. I was afraid to even go to the store because I was like, I'm just going to look at a bunch of stuff that I love and that I want, but I don't have the money to afford. I mean, I was pushing my boys in like a $7 umbrella stroller that I'd bought on clearance at Target. And I was just embarrassed to even bring that stroller into her store because it was really high-end stuff. And what ended up happening is, she tells me, I own this boutique and I go to all of the trade shows around the world and this stuff is hot and I want you to make it for me. And I was like, what? I was really disoriented because I went into the store feeling shame, embarrassment, and like I wasn't worthy of being in there. And she instead tells me, no, I want to put your things on my store shelf. And it just took my brain a little while to be like, wait, what are you saying? Because it's easier to convince people of your perspective, right, than to take on their perspective. And I'm like, you like this stuff? And, I knew the behind the scenes of all of it. It was barely the fabric that I could afford that was in the recycle bins at, Walmart. And I made this on a 50-plus-year-old sewing machine because I couldn't afford a new sewing machine, right? Like I knew the resourcefulness required to create these things. And what she saw was the brilliance of my ideas. And, this was a moment, Chelsea, where this woman, she transformed my life. And she just said, look, because I was throwing all my excuses at her. And she looked at me and she said, look, I understand that you're really busy right now. Because I had an infant in my arms and then I had my toddler in the stroller. And I was telling her all the reasons why she doesn't want my things and why I can't make that for her. And she said, I understand that you're really busy right now, but someday these kids are going to be in school full time and you're going to have a little bit more time on your hands. And you will wish that you had done something with these gifts and talents that you have. And in that moment, she gave me a beautiful gift. She transported me to the future. And I got to experience the tremendous regret that I would feel in 5 years and how it wasn't too late because I was still in the now. And there was something I could do right now to prevent the Katie of 5 years from now from feeling that regret. And it was an incredible moment. And so long story short, I started taking action on it. And there was so much inside my head and my heart that I was at war with, and we can talk about that later. But ultimately ended up building a business, creating a business that very quickly became a multi-million-dollar international business with distribution in 2,000 stores in the US and 26 different countries distributing my products. And in a very short amount of time, my products were featured on the Ellen DeGeneres Show, the Rachel Ray Show, the Today Show. My husband and I have been on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine, and it was because I had the audacity to face that potential regret and do something about it today.
Wow. That is a story, I have to say. That is amazing. And it's interesting because Donovan and I, over a cigar and an old fashioned last night, actually, we're talking a little bit about regret. And, you know, it's a very powerful motivator. Not regret, but the idea of what the regret will be in the future. So I just find it really interesting that you brought that up today.
So I read in your bio that you also started this in 2008, obviously recession.
Yeah. That's a year.
Hey, if you start at the bottom, Donovan, the only place to go is up. That was my.
I guess
that
so.
was my thinking.
I guess so. You know, the level of commitment, I think, for products over like service-based businesses is just completely different, because you really are creating something and going full steam ahead with the hope and the desire to get these to market and to make everything work. And sometimes it takes scale. So how was that process starting off? And it sounds like you started in that boutique and then maybe kind of grew from there. Or...
Yeah, I love that you understand the major difficulties and obstacles when it comes to physical products. Scale is huge. The cost to manufacture goods on low production is you can't turn a profit. You can't. And in fact, you're spending more money to make your inventory than you are getting back. And so that's what it looked like in the beginning. We were manufacturing them locally, meaning at a factory that was about 3 hours from our house in Seattle. And costs like labor and materials and actual tools and production, it was ridiculously expensive. And we didn't have money to invest. We'd been living on food storage. I was grinding wheat, literally grinding wheat to make bread to feed the family. And again, like when we talk about 2008 and starting from the bottom, that's where we were. And my husband did have a day job, but it was barely paying the bills. And my grocery budget, I'll call it that, my grocery budget, and that included diapers for multiple kids, was $120 a month. So between the food storage and the few $120 I had a month, we were just trying to figure out how to get by. And, you know, my situation was physically very scarce. But the gift of that is it requires tremendous resourcefulness. So we were extremely resourceful. And we got very good at painting the picture, painting the vision for all of our partners on where it is that we were going. And if you can get people on board with your mission and help them see that vision, they will be so devoted to you and so committed to that vision that they will invest in your company in whatever way that they can. And so in a lot of ways, that's what we had to do in the beginning, is we had to utilize that resourcefulness, and we had to get people on board in the beginning because I didn't have the cash to make it all go. But long story short, we would go to these manufacturers and like paint the picture and try and get them bought in on the vision. And in the beginning, we were selling, this is an infant bathtub. We were selling it for $100, Donovan, and like people hated us for it. Because most baby bathtubs are like $17 and it's just a hard piece of plastic. And what's so wild is like that just covered our costs, right? It was not feeding my family. So even at $100, we found a few customers, enough that it allowed us to prove the concept and prove the demand. And so again, this was like 2008, 2009. Amazon was barely on board. Like only weird people were buying anything from Amazon. The level of people just didn't trust something that was for sale online. The trust wasn't there. They had to see it and feel it and touch it to trust it enough to buy it. And so, but there were enough outliers who would buy products online. And so that's who my initial customers were, and they would pay $100 for it. And Donovan, it's so cool to kind of think back to those days, 2007, 2008. I had a very early rudimentary website, but I was selling product and I was getting requests from all over the world. I still remember hopping on Skype with this woman out of Amsterdam who had seen my product on a mommy blog. And she was like, I need that right now. We hop on Skype. She has this gorgeous home that's very design centric. It's like my dream home. And I'm just embarrassed because I'm in like her dumpy starter home. And she will pay whatever it costs to get my product, including $250 for shipping. And it proved the concept. We were solving a problem for people. And it was solving a problem on a deep and profound emotional level. When you're a brand new parent and you have a screaming child and you're trying to bathe that child and that child is shrieking and they're getting all red and they're shaking, you will do anything to calm that baby down. And that's what my product did. Is it calmed the baby down, allowed them to relax. And when you're pregnant and you're imagining what it's going to be like to be a new mom, you just imagine that beautiful bonding experience with your baby. And I was having the opposite experience. It was traumatic. And it was traumatic for the baby. They're like sloshing around in this hard plastic bathtub that doesn't cradle them. They don't feel safe. They don't feel secure. The hard plastic is cold against their skin. It's abrasive. And then you have all the storage issues on the other side of that. And my husband and I had taken our design skills and we had really solved a core issue, not just on the physical level, but on the emotional level as well. And I think that's kind of the magic of everything I've ever done, is I know how to design a solution that doesn't just solve the physical issue, but it also solves the emotional issue. And it's what I do with my entrepreneurs today. So we started selling the product at $100 and it proved the concept. And we got these requests almost weekly internationally, like this woman out of Amsterdam that I was telling you. And it was enough for us to double down and go into debt because we were at zero. At that point, Amex sent us a card. This was right before all the markets crashed in 2008. They sent my husband a credit card with a $25,000 limit. And he was like, this is so dangerous. He called them and he was like, what are you doing? You shouldn't be sending me this.
But I'll use it.
And he was like, I'm going to cut this up. And they were like, hey, it's yours if you want it. Like they were just flinging money at us. And so when we got to this point where it was like, we'd kind of proven the concept, but we still didn't have money to invest in it. That's where we were like, we are just going to take this thing. We're going to go all in on this. And we doubled down. And we went to Las Vegas. We built a trade show booth. And it allowed us to talk to all of the retail buyers. And long story short, Donovan, the stars, to your point, you have to have scale. And the only way we were going to have scale is either money from investors or somehow the stars align and we get enough orders and then money from those orders that we hit go on the factories. And that's what happened was number 2. We got enough. We went to Las Vegas. We got enough orders. Everybody who came into the booth placed an order. And it allowed us to go to our manufacturer and say, look at these $30,000+ in orders, hit go. And our manufacturer then imported the goods from Korea because we needed high quality goods. We're in the baby space. We couldn't be using junk material. And so they imported high quality goods on their dime, by the way. Started manufacturing the products, shipped it to us on, I think, like 60-day terms. And we were able to charge credit cards and ship out product and cash flow the whole thing. So it's an absolute miracle that it all worked out, but it did.
And that's part of that commitment and buy-on you got from your partners in your idea and what you were going to do. Sold it first, showed them that, they were on board with it, and you got going.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting about the idea of like being so mission centric and before you even had proof of concept is that a lot of the businesses that I've seen, they grow based on sales, right? Like it's all really front end product or service driven at the beginning. And then once they get, a couple years in, maybe make a few million, they're like, okay. Or then they get a retention problem and they start looking around at, their actual business. And it's like, so what is our why? What is our mission? Let's define our values. Let's get very mission centric. A lot of businesses do that after they've had success, but it sounds like you did it before you had success, which likely contributed to how quickly you had success, I would think.
I love that you see that. And that's the artist in me. I want what I'm doing to be meaningful.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep.
At what point in the process did you know that you wanted to sell Pudge?
We had always, from the very beginning, known that that was part of the long-term plan. And so it influenced a lot of our decisions. We invested heavily into IP and trademarks from the very beginning. So even while I was still grinding wheat and feeding the family and we were starting to generate revenue, I didn't increase my salary to myself. We were living as a family of 5 on very little. I think initially we started paying ourselves like $3,500 for a family of 5. It's just nothing. And my mortgage was at least half that. So it was just like nothing. And instead we were directing funds towards IP, trademarks, patents, because I knew that in order to eventually someday exit this company, I needed to have that intellectual property. Like that's what would the value that somebody would be purchasing. So I needed to own those things.
What advice would you give to a business if they're looking to sell or kind of get into those conversations? Like I know we just went through it and we learned some interesting things on the back end, but I know you actually help entrepreneurs through this process. What are kind of some big takeaways for people considering that route?
What's interesting is as soon as things started working for us, people were immediately wanting to have that conversation. And I pushed it away in the beginning. And what I would say is, if those kinds of conversations are coming to you, have those conversations because they are an amazing education. And I wish that sooner I had engaged in those conversations because, first of all, it's a language and a conversation that was so foreign to me. So in the beginning, I pushed it away because I was afraid I was going to expose my naivete and my inexperience in business. And the reality is, you should not be doing the first deal that comes your way because you don't know enough about your business and the value that you bring to the world to really get what you're worth. And I knew intellectually that I was the one creating the value. It was really fascinating to watch as I created this brand and these products that all of a sudden there was all of this enterprise that was happening around me and I was at the core of it. And so even though I was, underfunded in a lot of ways and inexperienced, I was the thing that was creating value for my manufacturers, my distributors, my retail partners, and yeah, of course, my customers and clients, but like everybody around me, including, press and media that was talking about us, we were the story that they were telling. So like I was creating, in a sense, the product for them. And all of that was centered around the value that we created out of thin air. So in the beginning, I knew that intellectually, but I didn't understand financially how important that was. So I would say if those conversations are starting to come to you, have those conversations and maybe even frame them or look at them as this is my education because someday I will want to exit. And that's not the time to learn about what that looks like to exit is when you want to do it. Learn about it now. And so I actually had a friend who was really high up. He was the CMO at Nike. He was a friend's father. So really early on, I had a similar type question for him. And he helped me realize I need to be having these conversations with everyone that comes my way. He was like, you talk to them. You ask them questions. You don't have to share all of your information with them. Like you're in control of that. And I think that's the other piece that's important to know because they will start making really big requests of you. They want to see everything. And you can save that information. That is yours and you decide who sees that. Because once somebody else sees that, you become extremely vulnerable. So I would say in the beginning, start having those questions, but be really curious about them. What's the information they want? What is it they want to see? What is it they would hope would be behind the curtain in my business? And you don't have to share your information. You can string them along as you want because you're the one who creates the value. And they have nothing without you.
I feel like I just relived a conversation that Donovan and I had a few years ago where like we started to get approached by, agencies that were interested in buying our agency and it freaked me out. And he was just like, it's a conversation. Yeah. It's fine. Like this is our education, right? Like a few years ago, the first time that we got to sit at a table with a client with thousands of employees, we were like, holy shit, that's the norm now. But then it was like, oh my God. And he would say like, this is our education, So I just felt like I relived a moment from the past.
Yeah, you learn a lot in the questions, and I think that's exactly it. And what they're looking
Mhm.
for, you kind of find out what is valuable about what you're doing. And sounds like you did all the right steps to kind of protect yourself, get all the legal handled early.
Mhm.
So that's really cool.
Yeah.
What year did
Yeah.
you?
And I will tell you, Donovan, like, because we did that, when we did decide that we wanted to be actually open to potentially finding a partner, whether that's a partner to scale and partially exiting or doing a full exit, we started getting offers that were such BS. And if we had not gone through that education process, it could have looked fantastic. And we understood our value. We understood the terms enough to know that what you're handing us is garbage. And we would basically be handing our company over to you and losing all control and not getting anything until if and when someday you decide to exit, right? So because we had some of those early initial conversations, then when we got a bogus offer, we recognized it and we were able to walk away from those.
I know you work with a lot of CEOs, business owners now, and you've transitioned obviously out of Pudge with the sale, and you develop
Mhm.
powerful leaders. I've seen it in
Yeah.
practice. I know this is what you do, and you're amazing at it. What are some common traits, we'll say, that you see that hold entrepreneurs back from being their most powerful self?
Mhm. Such a good
You're like,
question.
there's so many. Hold on.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is if you're an entrepreneur, you see the world totally differently than everybody else. And sometimes we can feel shame about that. Like, I'm not like everybody else, and therefore I'm different, I'm separate, and there can be shame. And so just recognizing that your brain works differently than everybody else, and that's good and that's fantastic, is really important for everybody that I work with. And then understanding how to utilize this incredible brain that you have in a way that it empowers you and your team. Because a lot of times, what I see when people come to me is they've gotten to where they are utilizing control. And they will maintain control because it's the only way they know how to get the outcome that they want and know that is possible. And so they get really good at kind of manipulating their team, manipulating their partners. And it's not because they want to be manipulative, it's not their intention, but it's the only tool they know how to get the outcomes that they need. And so I think just being open to the possibility that there's a powerful way of operating that you don't see in movies, you don't see in magazines. You don't hear about it on most podcasts. You'll hear about it on my podcast, What's Working Now. You don't read about it in books. And so what can be difficult when you're trying to be a way that you don't see reflected back to you is you're stepping in the dark. And there's just all this unknown. And so the mistake that I see entrepreneurs making is not recognizing that their brain works differently, then projecting the way they operate and work onto other people, and then being extremely disappointed with their team because their team's being idiotic, lazy. They won't say those things out loud. And once I help them see that it's obvious to you, and for you to see something that you don't see, somebody has to just hint to it once and you have a very clear picture of it. That's not how your team works. That's not how their brain works. They need to be reminded of it 27
32.
times,
Yeah.
maybe 27,000
like way more times.
Yeah. And so understanding that difference and distinction, it's not to say one person is better than the other, they're just different. And so, because that's their fear, that if I acknowledge that my brain works differently and that what's hard for you is so blatantly obvious and clear to me, then I'm elevating myself above you. And the people that I work with are men and women of integrity. They don't want to do this game of like positioning and pushing other people down. And so that's what they're trying to avoid, is this like one up, one down mentality. They're trying to avoid that. But in doing it, they disempower their team and they maintain too much control of their business. And then they become the bottleneck of their business. And the reality is there's only 24 hours in a day. We all are subject to that. And so people will come to me, Chelsea, and they're working like 120 hours a week. They have a team that's not performing because they don't realize they've trained their team to be disempowered in their responsibilities. And their team is just like tossing everything at the entrepreneur. And so he's working nights and weekends, and he has this high level of discipline and capacity, and he'll take on way more work than anybody else is even willing to. But in the process, and maybe it's his marriage, maybe his health, maybe his spirituality, but there are components of his life that are starting to break down because he's taken on too much.
I think we experienced that a few years ago because, I think everybody starts a business for freedom. They want to live their life the way they want to. They want to make sure they can spend time with their family and have vacations and do all those kinds of things. But throughout that process of starting a business, you kind of do exert that control. You realize like you can't have freedom and try to control everything. Those are opposite thoughts. And that's a tough process because you're right. Like, when it's your creation, your business, it's perfectly clear to you how things should be, what should be done, what's the next step. And it's a process to trust your team to kind of take that on.
And I feel like it's a process that even like as we sit here now, we've been lucky enough to have really great coaching and go through our business and, learn these things early on. But it's a never ending growth cycle. The difference is now is I catch myself when I am doing my control bullshit instead of looking around and blaming everybody else. I'm like, oh, no, it's me. Hold on. Time out. Like, let me try this again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The painful thing is, as the CEO, you're complicit in the dysfunction of your team. But the beautiful news of that is if you're complicit, that also means you have influence. And so if you're the obstacle, that means you're also the opportunity. And that's where I move my CEOs, is I move them from being that obstacle to really being a powerful catalyst in their business that is no longer utilizing that tool of control, but empowerment.
Have you read the book, The Obstacle is the Way?
I've not, but like so many people tell me I need to read that.
It's so good.
It's that same concept.
Yeah, it's exactly what you just said. So I feel like I've gotten a really good grasp of your ethos, but I'd be curious to hear you share with our listeners what that driving force is, that kind of character that guides your decisions has been throughout your life.
When I was younger, I think it wasn't super conscious for me what was driving me. And I've come to kind of realize that later on in life. And when I was younger, it was just a feeling. I was chasing a feeling. And it was that feeling of being seen. It was a feeling of peace. It was a feeling of momentum and being lit up by life. It was a feeling of discovering and exploring and creating value. And so what drives me today is I am radically curious about what is possible for me. How far can I take these gifts and talents that God has given me? For a long time in my life, I was limiting myself and trying to fit myself into a square little box that was defined by other people. And what I've come to discover is there's so much potential for me and everybody in my life. And I now utilize business as a powerful vehicle for me to become the woman that God created me to be. I really feel like each of us are born with really unique gifts and talents and abilities. And there's some cocktail of skills and talents within you, Chelsea, that have never existed in the world previous to you and will never exist after you are gone. And there's something really special about that. And there were times in my life where I tried to hide parts of myself. I was embarrassed or ashamed of my creative side because it wasn't what was valued in my home. The intellect was. And I had that, but I kind of suppressed the creative part of myself. And so using business as a powerful vehicle for me to develop into this woman that God placed that potential inside of me, I'm just so curious about that. Like what's actually possible. And especially as somebody who kind of limited myself for a long time, once I finally opened up to like, wait a minute, maybe I'm not just a stay-at-home mom whose sole responsibility is to make meals for people and do laundry. And I'm not saying I need to throw that out the window, but maybe there's more to me than that. And that's what really drove me in the beginning. And today it's shifted more to like helping other people experience that for themselves.
It's a pretty incredible mission. I absolutely think the world of you, Katie Richardson. Like, I am blown away. The times that I've met you in person, you know, people talk about individuals lighting up a room. Like, you light up a block of houses. You light up a community. You light up the world, truly. Like, I am absolutely just blown away by you. Okay, Katie, surprise. I want to do with you what you do with all your podcast guests to close out our show. So we're going to do rapid fire. So Katie does this on her podcast, What's Working Now. Highly recommend to all of our listeners, go check it out. It's truly about what is working now. Times are changing. You have to evolve with the times. This is the podcast for you. But what Katie does at the end of her podcast with some of her guests is she does this rapid fire. So it's 3 questions, and I want you to answer those 3 questions to close us out. Number 1, what is something that you do consistently every day?
I take care of myself.
What does that look like?
And I learned that the hard way in the beginning. It's always evolving, but it usually consists of some sort of physical component. So most mornings I walk for an hour at sunrise and get low light, and I lift weights. I say prayer, I read scriptures, I kind of greet my kids and get them started in their day. So those are things that I have found help me feel grounded, help me feel centered, help me feel alive, and that help me access my magic.
What is one piece of advice that stuck with you throughout your life?
It's funny, Chelsea. Every time I ask that question to somebody else, I'm like, what would I say?
Honestly, when I was reading these, I was like, I don't know for the one piece of advice. Like, I really don't know what mine would be either. So it's okay if you can't find it.
No. I want to find something.
Like, give me
I want to find something. You know, what's coming up is an experience that I had where I really felt like God, Providence, the Creator spoke to me. And in the beginning, I was in this wrestle because my business, I talked a little bit about getting it going, and I didn't tell you about all of the failures. I didn't tell you about the other trade show I went to where I came home empty-handed, where I thought it was going to be the moment that we finally had some cash. And instead I came home with all I could afford was one giant chocolate chip cookie that I had to break in half to share with my 2-year-old and 4-year-old, because I couldn't even afford 2 cookies to bring home with them. Like, that's how broke I was, and broke in that moment. And so, you know, as I saw how building this incredible business was disrupting my ability to be the kind of mom that I wanted to be, and I saw how it was making me super on edge and just short with my husband, and then therefore creating conflict in my marriage. I saw how it had me feeling like a victim to God and his kind of dreams and desires for me. And I was in this wrestle once where I just couldn't figure out how to move forward. And I started to wonder if I needed to let go of the business. And even though it was taking off, as I walked down that road, I was like, I know where this road goes. I have an incredibly big business that has me with like gobs of money and significance and fame. But I also have a broken marriage, and I don't have a relationship with my kids. I don't even know how I feel about God and my Creator anymore. And as I walked down that road, I was like, I don't like that road. I don't want to go down that road. Yeah. And yet letting go, it seemed like the business was the thing that was disrupting it all. And yet letting go of the business also felt really off to me. And I was like, how do I move forward? Because these are all incompatible. And as I'm asking these questions, I'm in this wrestle. My kids are finally asleep. The dishwasher's running and I'm sweeping, and I'm like in this fight with God. And I'm like, this doesn't work. I've walked this down the road and I know where this goes. So I don't know what you're talking about telling me to build this business, because it's totally incompatible with every other thing in my life. And in that moment, he really spoke to me, and he said, Katie, you're looking for the proof that what I'm inviting you to do works. And you don't need proof, because I've taught you creation. So while you might not see the woman who's capable of building this business and life that you want, you don't have to see her. You know creation, go create her. And it very specifically was focused around her, me. At that time, I was looking for the right business model. I thought that's what I needed. And what God showed me in that moment was, you're the business model. Like,
Yeah, design
if you
yourself.
can create. Yes, it was take that design process that you have that created this brilliant product that's attracting millions of customers around the world with zero ad spend. Take that design process and turn it on yourself. And all of a sudden, I went from living in the shoulds and supposed tos of my life to being like, ooh, let's explore, let's play, let's have fun. Like, who does Katie want to be?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was just in this place where I could really play and be free and have fun.
Oh, and I think that's every entrepreneur's ultimate dream is freedom, right? And not even just freedom in your business, but freedom to be exactly who you want to be. Last question, rapid fire. What is one book that you continue to come back to frequently?
I love the book, The War of Art. It's by Steven Pressfield, and it is short and sweet. Every page is its own chapter. And what Steven does so beautifully is, like, page by page, he describes the internal resistance that we run into as we are building something from nothing. And as we are having the courage to lead in this world, you'll experience all kinds of resistance. That's the nature of life. And the sad thing is sometimes when we run into a resistance, we think that that's a sign from the universe that we need to stop, that we're headed in the wrong direction. And I was actually just watching a really cool, and I'm not good at short answers, by the way.
This isn't rapid fire. This is long fire, and I'm totally here for it. It's fine.
Long story short, we've heard about these longevity studies where, like, people in Okinawa, Japan somehow live longer and happier lives. And yes, there's this diet component, but one of the things that he discovered is there's also this village in Italy. And one of the components he realized is these old people have physical opposition in their life. So in Japan, they don't have furniture. It's like old people sit on the floor instead of the couch. And so they're getting up off the floor. The level of resistance in that person's life is pretty high versus somebody who has a lazy boy.
Yeah.
Right?
And flat
And the
terrain.
same with this, yes.
Yeah.
And flat terrain. Yes. And the same with this village in Italy is they realized these people were going to church services daily, but they were going uphill. Can you imagine, like, a 95-year-old walking up steep hills to go to church? My empathetic heart is like, oh, somebody give that person a ride. Well, if they were taking a car every day, they wouldn't be facing that opposition. It was that opposition that was creating the joy. It was that opposition that was creating the strength in their life. And they were able to live these really beautiful, meaningful lives. And so the same is true here. Like, if you can understand your opposition, you then are empowered to flip it and turn it into your power and your strength. And that book, The War of Art, it helped me kind of name that internal war, that internal battle that I was in. And once you've named it, you then are empowered to transform it. And so I love that book. I love everything about it. I love the format. And he broke a lot of rules in a lot of ways, and how he wrote it and how most books are written. And I love that.
That's amazing. We truly enjoyed today's conversation. Where can our listeners find you, Katie?
Go to What's Working Now. Go listen to the first 8 episodes of that podcast, and you'll hear greater detail, and you'll learn some incredible principles from my own entrepreneurial journey. And then I'm also really active on Instagram, katie.live. I'm active in my stories, and then there's links in my Instagram profile if you want to go see case studies. I've helped people overcome tremendous obstacles. I actually love it when someone comes to me with, like, this impossible puzzle, and they're like, nobody in my life can solve this. I'm like, cool, come to my world. We're going to figure this out. And I utilize my design skills and my ability to kind of reverse engineer for the outcome that they want. And it includes the constraints like your marriage and your kids and your spirituality. Like, can we build your business in a way that is sustainable for all of those areas of your life? And that's the puzzle that I love solving. And so you can go see the case studies of people that have helped overcome huge opposition.
You are the reason
what they want.
Yeah, and they should. So You are the reason that we've started the Ethos Effect podcast, to have a platform to talk to people just like you. I think there's so much we can learn and grow. And, the fact that you have a business where you actually do that full time is very nice for all the people listening here as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Katie.